Hello and welcome to the podcast of Univerzitet of Sarajevo, dedicated to 30-year commemoration of genocide in Srebrenica. Through the 6 episodes of the podcast, we will talk to 6 renowned experts who took part in the international scientific conference Srebrenica 30 years after the genocide, memory, responsibility, and challenge of denial. My name is Tina Kalinic. I'm senior assistant at the Academy of Performing Arts in Sarajevo. And in the 3rd episode, I have an honor to welcome Niké Wentholt, right?
Yes.
An assistant professor at the University of Humanistic Studies in Utrecht, Netherlands, a member of Dialogics of Justice team. Okay, so I managed to say it all properly. We thought that it would be nice to talk to you because you're bringing a different angle into the story. You're actually talking about Dutch response to the genocide, and what was very interesting to me was that you're talking about responsibility, but it is not so much about taking responsibility as much as recognizing that it is a part of the same history, that is a traumatic event that we share. Can you tell us a bit more about the difference between taking responsibility and accepting something as a historic fact that is important for Dutch society?
Yes, of course. Thank you. I'm so happy to be here. So I think that accepting the Srebrenica genocide as a shared history, as shared Bosnian-Dutch history, actually helps us to have this conversation about political responsibility. And of course, I'm not saying that the Netherlands has an equally big tragedy in the Srebrenica genocide. It's not. It's a Bosnian tragedy, of course. It's horrible for Bosnian people mostly. But because the Netherlands was there, we were there, all soldiers were there, all our politicians made the decision to be there, we share a responsibility to remember. And I think, unfortunately, the Netherlands is not yet there, where it really recognizes that this is a shared history. I think the Netherlands still externalizes Srebrenica a little bit, like as if it was something that could only happen in a country far away, and as if our presence there was more accidental. And I don't think that is true.
Yeah, you deal a lot in your paper with the difference between affirmative and transformative recognition. Can you explain the difference?
Yes, of course. Yeah, so in recognition, we often talk about people giving recognition, right? So, for example, I've done something terrible to you. Well, now I'm going to be a great person and I'll give you recognition of that I did something terrible. But unfortunately, when I give you recognition, I still affirm that our relations were unequal. I still place myself above you because I give you something and you can only passively receive it. So that's what we call affirmative recognition, where the, let's say, inequality of the injustice itself is repeated in the act of recognition. So what we mean by transformative recognition is that it's not about giving recognition, but it's a process where you, as the person who was harmed, also gets a say in the recognition you will receive. So it's not a process of giving and receiving, but it's a process of dialogue between you and me. And in that process, we hope that the relations become more equal. So I'm not giving recognition to you as a passive subject, but you are actually speaking up and you are taking ownership of the process. So it transforms relations between the person who did the wrong thing and the person who was harmed.
Yeah. When we speak about academic work in the field of genocide studies, let's call them like that, it is interesting that you actually have a colleague that you work with, Almom Mustafić, who is a survivor. And when we were talking before, we were talking about this dichotomy in which it is very important to hear the survivor stories, and we use the stories for the research. But the moment when the people who survived something decide to do the research, they are not believed, they are not trustworthy, not objective, and in academic society, lots of times they're pushed aside as they become unreliable witnesses, actually. I wanted to touch upon that with you and to ask more about your experience with working with Alma and what you did, and what is the importance of academic society, and what are then the backlashes for the people who don't fit completely into objective observer position?
Yeah, thank you so much for that question, because this is always, to me, one of the most important things. So Almom Mustafić, yes, she's a survivor of the Srebrenica genocide, but most of all, she is a genocide expert herself. She works at the University of Applied Sciences in Utrecht. She's a very dear colleague and friend of mine. But what we notice is when we go somewhere together to speak about the Srebrenica genocide, they see her as a survivor and they see me as an expert. Well, I can guarantee you that she can tell you much more detail about what happened in Srebrenica, but it also can give you all the definitions of genocide that I'm struggling to remember. So she's obviously the expert on genocide, just as much, if not more, than I am. But I am considered by many people in the Netherlands as neutral because I'm Dutch. Which is kind of weird if you think about it.
Because it's not that
it's not very neutral. Yeah, it's not a very neutral position to have, which I'm very aware of when I am in Bosnia or when I am in Serbia, right? I realize that, and that's okay to me. I have a responsibility as a Dutch citizen. I know that. But what Alma and I are trying to do is to show that our expertise is equally worthy, and that her expertise also as a survivor, so not only as a renowned genocide expert, but also as a survivor, has a lot of value. So that's why we wrote an academic article together with shared first authorship, which in academia is also really important to, unfortunately, to arrange and to emphasize. And we show her lived experience also as a form of expertise. Because apart from being a genocide expert and a survivor, she also sued the Dutch state. And she held the Dutch state liable. So she has this lived experience of, as a family, because she did it together with her family, as a family holding a state accountable, which I think by all standards is a pretty cool thing to do.
Yeah, that's actually also something that is pretty interesting, and I'm not sure that it is well known in our society at all about the 3 cases that you and Alma were researching and writing about. Those are actually 3 cases where people managed to hold the Netherlands government accountable for what happened in Srebrenica. So can you give more details, because you know it better than I do, of course.
Yeah, no, I'm happy to. Yeah, so the Netherlands saw 3 court cases eventually, and interestingly, they were held in civil court. So it was not about criminal proceedings, but civil court. So it was really about the question, what is the responsibility of the Dutch state? So not of, the Dutch bad soldiers or individual politicians, but the Dutch state. And it was very impressive what Hasan Nuhanović, the Mustafić family, and the Mothers of Srebrenica did. So those were the 3 cases. Because they showed that the killings of their loved ones was actually not something inevitable, but was something that the Dutch state was liable for not doing more to prevent it. So these court cases were all about people who were either working for the Dutch troops or were in the compound on July 11, July 12, and July 13. And the Dutch judges in all these cases actually ruled that Dutchbat and Dutch politicians could have done more to protect these people. So all these cases were successful to the level of the Supreme Court. So in all these cases, it was ruled that the Dutch state is liable for the damages occurred after the killing of these people. So unfortunately, it does not consider all the 8,372 people killed in Srebrenica, which I actually think should be. So there I disagree a little bit with the legal part of things. But it was still amazing to see that Bosnian and Bosnian Dutch citizens held the Dutch state accountable for what they did. And of course, these court cases had huge potential. I'm not really excited, unfortunately, what Dutch politics and society did with this potential. I think they could have done much more, but the cases itself are a breakthrough.
Yeah, with that we're actually coming to what you will be talking about at this conference. You were mentioning a change of narrative, and that's actually something that I think is very important. We have, especially because of this denial part that we have to face all the time. Those 3 cases were possible to change narrative in the direction that would go more into this shared history moment. But can you touch upon what the narrations are at the moment, and how do they fit, how these 3 cases fit into narratives, or are pushed aside because they don't fit completely into what the majority of society feels that works the best for them?
Yeah, no, I'll try. Unfortunately, I'll start by saying that in the Netherlands there's still this narrative that Dutchbat couldn't have done differently. And even sometimes I'm talking about Srebrenica in high schools, and at one point this pupil, a kid actually, came to me and said, but shouldn't the Bosnian people be grateful that we were there in the first place? And of course this is not the kid's fault that he has this idea in mind. But it was so painful for me to hear, because apparently in the Netherlands we still have this narrative that Bosnian people should have been grateful that we were there, Bosnian people should have been grateful, and we couldn't have done differently. Now, this is actually a narrative that the courts completely turned around, right? In one of my favorite paragraphs of the ruling, and I'm not a legal expert, so I struggle with legal rulings, but one of my favorite paragraphs, it says, and I'm paraphrasing here, this is not the exact legal words, but they say, what Dutchbat could have done? They could have printed cards, because the argument was we did not have the UN cards available for them, so we could not prove to the Serbs that they were UN employees, which Alma's father, Risa Mustafić, and Hassan Uhanović family were. But the Dutch judge just said, well, you could have printed them. You had a printer, you had their names, you could have printed the cards and showed the Bosnian Serbs and just, have saved these people. And I think even more importantly than that, the judges showed that there was this question of political responsibility, of what did the people in Den Haag, in The Hague, decide. And they showed that there's something like effective command, so that or sort of effective control, so that actually politicians in Den Haag were in control in a certain way of what was happening there. And I think that really showed us that it is this shared responsibility, it is this shared history. What was happening in The Hague was affecting what was happening in Srebrenica. So this narrative that the court actually confirms, and also the court had horrible other narratives. So, it wasn't a perfect ruling in any way. They spoke of Muslim men, Muslim enclaves, things I really, really dislike. So reinforcing this ethnicized, militarized narratives. But the court did turn this around, and unfortunately it didn't have much impact in Dutch society. So in Dutch society, the Srebrenica genocide is still being framed as part of a civil war, for example. So not a war of Serb aggression, not a genocidal war, but like a moment of genocide in a very chaotic civil war, in which Dutchbat, was just kind of completely, caught off guard and couldn't have known what was happening. Well, of course, we know now that Dutchbat could have known what was happening, because in 1992, 1993, and 1994, so many massacres, so many genocidal campaigns had already been.
Yeah, that seems actually to be one big part of the denial story, is that it's forgotten that the path to Srebrenica genocide was paved before. So in a very weird way, not in a weird way actually, in a very easy way, there could be assumptions what will happen. So those narratives are something that I think makes problems for everybody included. It's like to just come to the next step, reconcile, and then try to put it in a place where it should be. So not put it away, but put it in a way where it should be, and then stop living it. Because as long as we are in this crazy storm of narratives, we are all going to get lost in it. But how much do you think that it actually also has to do with this small particularity that actually, I think all the people that were killed were Muslims? Is it something that you think frames, the mind of, Dutch people, then Europeans? It's not that it is any different, I believe, in Netherlands than in the rest of Europe. Do you think it has an impact?
Unfortunately, yes, I do think so. And I'm really happy that you asked this question, because I think exactly what you say, we have to kind of talk about this. We have to bring it into the open. Now, of course, I understand that not all people in Srebrenica actually were Muslims in the sense that they had this religious identity or ethnic identity even. Many people saw themselves as Yugoslavs. But what did matter was that they were seen by the West as Muslims, and they were framed as such. And again, I'm not putting the blame on individual Dutch-bed soldiers, but there was a lot of Islamophobia amongst Dutch-beds. This is not their fault. This is Dutch societal fault, that these men and women were sent to a war, telling them it was a civil war in which all factions were equally aggressive. So in the Netherlands, we still talk about attacks happening from Srebrenica, right? As if it was a sort of symmetrical war in which, we still speak about jihadism from the Bosniak side, which of course, especially today, reinforces all these ideas of like aggressive Islam, aggressive Muslim people. So I feel that we as historians or academics, have the responsibility to call this out. We know that in the compound, the Dutch compound, there was horrible graffiti saying very Islamophobic and racist things. And I will not repeat it here, but if you go to the memorial in Potocari, you can read the graffiti yourself. And again, this is not to blame individual Dutch-bed soldiers who were sent there very unprepared, but it is to blame the Netherlands that is still not willing to recognize this. Even 30 years after the genocide, still not recognizing that it was a very Islamophobic genocide, of course, but also our presence there reinforces Islamophobic ideas. And there are people who say that Dutch-bed soldiers perhaps felt more, how would you say, the Bosnian Serb army was more familiar to them than the Bosniak refugees, which I can't really state.
Isn't that also a bit of dangerous narrative? Because we are talking about narratives a lot, and then when you put it, it's like they felt more familiar with the Serb side. It's like, okay, so maybe I think that this is actually something that you are dealing with, and that's why I'm trying to put it out. It's like we are forming narratives all the time, and all of those are somewhere in the air. It's like, and we can cherry pick.
Yes.
So yes. That's something that societies do. We are cherry picking parts of the stories. And that's where academic influence actually comes. And that's something that we are trying to talk to all of our guests for at least a bit, is what should academia do? What is part of scientific research, or something that we can do through the conferences like this, and through the work of objective and subjective researchers. I truly believe that there is no objective researcher when you think of it. It's like you come into every story with some idea in what direction it will go. But I would actually like to hear from you. Through Dialogue of Justice, you actually work a lot on themes like that.
Yeah, no, thanks. I think indeed, our responsibility as academics is to point out, where narratives are wrong or dangerous. But it's also to advocate for narratives that are more inclusive. And this morning in the keynote, it was said really well that often survivor testimonies holds these narratives that are rooted in inclusive depictions of what happened. So what survivor testimonies, for example, show us, it was said this morning in the keynote, was the continuity of violence. So violence does not end, in this case, for example, on July 15. No, the violence is still here, 30 years later. Every time the genocide is denied, every time the genocide is celebrated, it is a continuation of genocidal violence. And nobody can tell you better than survivors themselves. So that is why I find it so important that we as academics include survivor testimonies as true academic knowledge, actually as theoretical academic knowledge, because they show us something about what a more just society can be. And that's also what we try to do in Dialogics of Justice. So we study different cases of institutional and historic injustice in the Netherlands. So also injustice perpetrated by Shell, the oil company, or colonial violence by the Netherlands. And what we try to do in all these cases is showing the expertise from the people who have lived through the injustice to show what we call the expertise of lived experience. So not only saying, these people have some knowledge. No, these people are experts. They are experts in what happened, but they are also experts in what should happen to create a more just society. And I think we as academics have this responsibility to actually use our platforms to get people in, because I am always believed, and I'm not neutral. I'm definitely not neutral. I mean, I was born in 91, so my personal history as a Dutch citizen is tied up with the Srebrenica genocide. But I'm always believed. So it's my responsibility to make sure that I put someone next to me who then also can benefit from, the fact that I am believed. Saying, you should believe this person too. We are not neutral. So that's what I'm trying to do. Yeah.
But when you talk about testimonials, and we know testimonies are super important. It's like that's how, a criminal tribunal for the former Yugoslavia actually worked a lot. It's like it used testimonies. But we can see this development of testimonies going, then, kind of switching positions from something that was completely believed. It becomes art, which is something emotional, which, you don't have to believe completely because it's emotional and this is personal perspective. And then it goes into research and academia where, again, it's not completely believed. Although now it should be objective, and all the people that work in academia actually have to have references and have to have, it's not like you can sit and write whatever you want. So why do you think this happens? And do you see the difference between how accepted the artistic work of the survivors is in comparison to when they do the academic research?
Yeah, great question. I'm afraid it's still often a little bit performative, so to say, right? So for example, we're organizing an academic conference, and 2 months before the conference you realize, we need to do something with survivor voices. Okay, let's, include a theater play. But unfortunately, I think that's not the way. So indeed, survivors do produce beautiful art, but they also produce beautiful academic knowledge. They produce beautiful literature. They produce beautiful academic papers, and we should include all of them. So actually, I'm noticing in the Netherlands, right now, because the Netherlands is also gearing up to 30 years Srebrenica genocide, that unfortunately they're still inviting, let's say, white Dutch experts on the Srebrenica genocide, and not Bosnian Dutch experts, while we have 60,000 of them. Or they only include Bosnian Dutch experts for the emotional parts of the podcast, of the video, of the clip. And I think we all have this responsibility to say, thanks for asking me. Did you also consider asking, this Bosnian Dutch expert? So to show that, it's not only in the emotional artistic part, which is also very important, but also in this very political and academic knowledge.
So what do you think is actually importance of closing of this chapter for the Dutch society, because we will never, for sure, Srebrenica genocide chapter in Bosnia will never be closed, because that's something that now stays as it became a kind of a national trauma, because it is national trauma, and the children born actually will live with it in the future. But is there a possibility of closing that chapter for Netherlands and then, helping society in a way?
I don't hope so. I don't hope so, because there are so many Bosnian Dutch people in the Netherlands. So for them, the chapter of the Srebrenica genocide or the Bosnian genocide in general will not close. So what I hope is that the Netherlands will use the Srebrenica genocide as a shared history to talk about our responsibility more generally. So at the moment there are also court cases about bombings of the Netherlands in Iraq, in Afghanistan, with very similar narratives being repeated of, oh, it was such a complex war, we didn't realize there were all these civilians there, instead of acknowledging responsibility. So I hope the chapter won't be closed for a while, and we keep learning from the Srebrenica genocide.
Thanks a lot. It was a very nice final thought, so I will leave us at this. Thank you a lot for joining us for this podcast and for coming to the conference and thinking about subjects that are important for all of us.
Thank you so much. Hvala puno.